Fallen Empires, the dread Uvath. Welcome, gentle listener, I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and faces of the Warhammer 40k setting, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. If you wish to see the channel flourish, then like and subscribe, but also consider joining our Patreon or throwing a one-off tip in the form of a super thanks, if I have indeed earned your bounty. And also, do check out the links to pins and other such merch. And today, we return to the ongoing run of entries on Fallen Empires. There have been so many star-spanning races in the grim darkness of the far future. Many expired before the rise of humanity, even the first time, let alone its second iteration, what we now know as the Imperium of mankind. Thousands of Xenos races were encountered and subsequently exterminated by the forces of the Great Crusade. That rampage across the stars led by the Emperor, his 21 sons, the Primarchs, and their genetic legacy, the Legiones Astartes, the Space Marines. Many will see this as the boot that smashed down on the galaxy, that the Emperor and his sons were all tyrants. Yet few will ever put themselves in the shoes of either the Master of Mankind or his demigod-like sons. What they encountered out there in the darkness of the void, the foul beings that enslaved and even consumed humanity on an industrial scale. For it is hard to understand those who fight when sitting in the comfort which they provide. The Emperor was against Xenos of any kind, is what is widely touted, yet few remember that some species were offered protectorate status, as long as they agreed to curtail all hopes of expansion, and conditional on their accepting that they could not use humans as chattels, or worse. But they also forget that the Emperor of Mankind witnessed the betrayal of so many erstwhile allied Xenos races when humanity was at its weakest. Species, empires, and hegemonies that were the finest of friends when humanity was strong, during the Dark Age of technology, turned on humanity when Old Night began. Now some will state that it was logical, a revenge for the horror of the cybernetic revolution, as it is stated that the war against AI was so all-consuming that it spanned the entire galaxy, and required not only the reeling human federation, but all active sentient races to combine in their efforts to stop the terrible war machines of the AI. The artificial intelligence, or as we now know it, abominable intelligence. And the casualties and calamity of that revolt did not just affect humanity, but all who dwelt in the galaxy at that time. Hence, humanity was rightly punished for it, being the opener of Pandora's box. Yet the counter to this postulation is that it does not have any hard data or information of any sort to back it up. Hence, no matter how well reasoned, it is pure conjecture. What is undeniable fact is that many of the worlds that previously made up the Human Federation were assailed by Xenos the moment we, humans, were deemed weak. The experience of the expeditionary fleets and forces of the Crusade was to witness casual cruelty on a frequent and regular basis. The degradation and terrors they saw were real and almost universal. It was their own kind, humanity, that was the target of the vileness. But when one battles monsters, it is so easy to become one out of sheer necessity. Outside of the literature fed to young men, war is not kind nor honourable. Dulce et decorum est indeed. It is the struggle for survival. It is dark and desperate and forces men and women to do things that they would never dream they were capable of performing in lighter, brighter times. This is not to say that warriors cannot be honourable, for such is not the case, but it is almost universally true that the good intentions of those who march to war are rarely matched by their deeds when the danger is close and the enemy unfettered by such concerns. It can become a universal race to the bottom, For whom truly cares about distant metaphysical or ethical concerns when one is against a wall, fighting for their lives, for their species' very existence? And when one meets a species like the Uvath, it is easy to see how the event can scar the mind and very soul, and fill it with an intense and unabating hatred of all things Xenos. For there are few who are darker in the entire galaxy. Now we know the empire of this Xenos species has been swept away, as it is part of this run of entries, but sometimes it is a preponderance of man to consider something easy merely because it has already been done. Now some will state that this is pure mindset, and when a boundary has been smashed, it can then show how false it was and uncomplicated when it has been proven possible. The 1 minute mile being a good example. So many athletes were able to then breach this barrier when it had been proven possible. Yet this takes away the effort, the achievement and struggle involved in the accomplishment of the previously construed as impossible. Hence, one cannot believe, even for a second, that the lazy supposition of ease applies to any facet of this entry, this achievement. The death of the Uvath. Just because the Imperium managed to break the back of this foe, to crush their empire, does not mean it was easy or even a foregone conclusion. Many will state that the sheer resources of the Imperium, its manpower, vast fleets and populations make any feat near impossible to botch. But they miss the fact that the resources of the Imperium are stretched so very, very thin. Like Asimov's Galactic Empire in the Foundation series of books, the larger an organizational entity is, often means the slower it responds. The less effective or efficient it will become, until it finally devolves into a flaccid and incompetent committee, so ridden with competing internal struggles that it is effectively paralyzed by inertia. Before the coming of the Avenging Sun, Rebute Gilliman, the High Lords of Terror pretty much encapsulate this set of affairs. Internal jockeying for power and influence, preventing true governorship to the benefit of the whole. When a crusade can take centuries to construct is one concern, but when it takes many times that duration to be deemed necessary in the first place, this level of administrative delay leads to defeat after defeat, and a deepening of the issues while they are being discussed in said committees. So let me dispel any lasting reticence to believe that the defeat of this nasty empire was anything but easy, for it required a full crusade to be achieved, the Anjivine Crusade. Yet now, I feel I've danced around the point enough. Who and what were the Uvath? Like the Nephilim that were exterminated by the Blood Angels and Sons of Horus during the Great Crusade, the Uvath were a deeply psychic species. Theirs was an existence so rarefied and unique that their very form is almost impossible to confirm. Some say this was due to their psychic powers changing them on a fundamental level, making each a bespoke horror created by its interaction with the warp. Others surmise that it might have been down to their predilection for genetic manipulation, not only of their chattels, their slaves, but also of themselves. Others still believe that the Uvath bred with their enslaved races, and thus many of them were half-breeds. None can be absolutely certain of this point. What is true is that no two identical Uvath were identified during the confrontation. The Uvath were so dependent on the warp that they made the Eldar seem almost restrained and deeply materialistic in their culture. For every part, every single function of Uvath society, technology and culture seemed to be reliant on vast warp power. Their ships were powered by cores of direct conduits to the warp, like a warp rent right in the middle of their ship. The very building blocks of even their constructions were suffused with its dark essence. Theirs was thought to be an ancient civilization, although there is some potential nuance to this assertion. When the Anjivine Crusade burst into the Calax expanse, they found ruins that they later discerned to be of Uvath architecture and origin. Yet the Uvath were also said to be expanding on all fronts at that time, while still being within the confines of the expanse. Hence, it may be possible that they also had ebbs and flows to their empire, periods of domination and subsequent contraction, for whatever reason. The dread Uvath were in one of their expansionist phases when the Anjivine Crusade joined the party. And please do not believe that this was a lackluster or contained venture. No. The Anjivine Crusade was massive, containing millions of Astra Militarum forces, a significant number of Space Marine chapters, and all the support fleets, titans, and knightly households one would require to bring the Emperor's light unto the darkness. The Imperium meant business. When they penetrated further into the expanse, they inevitably came across the Uvath. At first, the matchings were simple and direct. Vini vidi vici, or weenie weedy wiki. The Crusade came, it saw, it conquered. Yet they were not to know that the flotsam and jetsam ragtag fleets they encountered were but the satrap states of the vile empire. For the Uvath had dominated scores of sentient races in the sector. They were the chaff which the Imperium swept away. Only when the Crusade came in hard did they finally match against the Uvath proper. And it was far from a cakewalk. For the Uvath ships were protected by shields formed of pure warp stuff, and the very design of their ships was so inimical to the human mind that many who merely viewed their ships unprotected were driven to madness. To battle the Uvath, be it in the void or planetside, was to risk not only one's sanity, but one's very soul, so drenched with evil were they. The races that they had dominated were like zombies, like flies around a pat, flying at the armies and fleets of the Anjivine Crusade with self-destructive abandon. Uvath technology was based entirely on the warp, but actualized into objects of crystalline or ceramic appearance. Yet they had unmistakable markings that shifted under the eye, tainted the very soul to even behold. Even when secured, the very nature of their science was banned by the Adeptus Mechanicus, and any found with such devices or objects would be hunted down by the Inquisition in years to come. Nor were these devices like so many trinkets one might find in halls from other races. They rarely had an on or off switch, so to put it. Most Xenos races who interact with the warp do so in limited means, knowing the corrupting and unpredictable, if not outright devastating effect that realm has on all it touches. No. The Uvath tech was permanently linked to the warp, and this meant that they were potential hotspots for warp breaches. Where the Imperium, the dark shadow realm now known as the warp, intersects with the Materium, the real world, and such interactions are almost universally terrible. Not just in nature, but also in scope. Those who captured, or worse, attempted to utilize their technology were corrupted by whispering darkness, their souls forfeit to the dark gods of that realm. Yet their effects, when harnessed, were incredible. The offer of almost limitless power can be incredibly alluring to the weak-willed or egotistical. The complexity came when the Imperium's fleets met the Uvath themselves. While approaching and engaging forces made of tens of different styles and origins of ships, it was initially difficult to correctly identify those controlled by the Uvath directly. Yet, the centermost vessels, those with terrible shields and designs, would then fire. Their attacks were not swift, but utterly devastating. It is reported that some of the Uvath ships could cripple, if not outright destroy, Imperial main ships of the line in a single strike. Thankfully, the Uvath were never many, hence their ships were the rarest in the fleets the Crusade met. Using gravity sails, the Uvath ships were nimble and swift. Their main weapons were the Void Skein rupture cannons and the Immaterium energy arc as categorized by the Imperium. The ruptured cannons were able to fire charges that disappeared into the warp, only appearing seconds before impact. The Imperium arc, believed to be created from the open rift at the center of the Uvath capital ships, was able to smash straight through, even void shields, able to carve through armor and decks, annihilating capital ships of the line as if made of paper. The Uvath were incredibly potent psychers and dominated entire populations with their will alone. The powers of the warp were theirs as a birthright. Whether this was due to genetics or eugenics, that Uvath only permitted those mighty in their connection to the warp from prospering, or if it was all Uvath as a matter of course, none can truly say with any certainty. But all Uvath encountered by the Imperium were dangerous beyond belief. Even their small arms weaponry and objects were twisted. In more than one case, a human who attempted to wield their weapons was consumed by them. The weapon being simply wielded at first, then came to dominate the owner, not only filling their minds with terrible visions and unpalatable new drives, but eventually wheedling their way into the very body of the owner, until they are more living weapon than anything even resembling their original race and form. These devices were also akin to the wraithbone of the Eldar, in that they were forged of warp stuff, and, left to their own devices and given enough materials, they would even self-replicate. The Uvath had void wasps as interceptors, and something called the Dark Lament, a web of warp energy that would control the very land, turning any battlefield against their foes and transforming it into an active part of the battle, a self-animated hellscape. To conquer a Uvath world was also later proven to be a mistake, for their evil permeated the very bedrock of said planets. Human colonists would be slowly corrupted, twisted in mind, body and soul. It would start with hallucinations of ever-increasing strangeness. Then evil would fill the mind of near all who dwelt upon the worlds, once home to the Uvath, as if their dark souls had somehow stuck to the world, permanently changing it. The Uvath's worlds were adorned with bone wardens protecting their most sacred places. A bone warden was a tower of body parts and once living flesh. One presumes that the majority of these parts would be taken from their slave races, which they used without remorse. All of the necrotic flesh would be held together and then animated by tendrils of dark power coursing through them. Once awoken, the Bone Warden would erupt into activity, filling the air around them with unpredictable bursts of electricity and a miasma of burning flesh. The Warden would then assail anything in its proximity, with near-infinite clawed hands and biting cadaverous maws. These nasty things would be incredibly difficult to destroy. To do so, one had to utterly eradicate the physical form, but while the battle was engaged, the Warden would absorb all the dead it had slain in the combat, its dark powers absorbing and animating the recently slain into its gestalt form. In large engagements against such creatures, the more warriors taken to the event, the more chance of a failure. Sending in ranks of rabble would only feed the Uvath atrocities more and more raw material. And it is a testament not just to the martial strength of the Anjivine Crusade, but also to their robust tenacity that they managed to defeat such a foe. For they did just that. They found every last slave race and every last center of power of the Uvath and destroyed them. The presumed home of the Uvath being eradicated by exterminators. And the Anjivine Crusade did all of this while also confronting the Bale Childer, though there are scant details on the xeno species that I can find at this time. But the tale of the Uvath is not entirely concluded, for some of their largest vessels were almost self-directed, and some still float out there in the darkness of the void. Have the Uvath been entirely exterminated? Well, their empire was. But is every last Uvath dead? Who can tell? I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. If you have enjoyed this wee biscuit of lore, then do consider liking and subscribing. If you are a regular gentle listener, then consider hitting the links in the description for pins, channels, and other details. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.